The bottom line here is that a lot rests on NVIDIA's shoulders tomorrow night. 35% of the S&P 500 is tied to stocks related to this AI trade, right? So it's kind of the Mag 7 names. Not only that, NVIDIA is 7.5% of the S&P 500 and 14% of the NASDAQ, right? So this stock is literally like the S&P itself is almost reporting earnings. And you can see short-term vols or short-dated vols are really elevated for Thursday and Friday, which take into account, this NVIDIA earnings. So if that AI story falls apart, then I think that there's a big component or a big part of the equity market that is going to start to loosen its bid, right? It's going to have a hard time maintaining a bid. And so, to your point, just at the top of the show right here, we're grinding along right now. The volatility expectations for today and tomorrow pre NVIDIA are very small. There's a giant zero DT position right now at 64.55 that the market's just kind of pulling into right now at the moment. And so, the short dated positions are there to suppress volatility, and things are really, I think, going to open up after NVIDIA tomorrow night.
All right, I'm looking right now as we're pulling back the clock here. That kind of up and to the right, the path for today seems pretty decent. So,
Yeah.
Brent, okay, tell me about that wall there, because I see that we're kind of in the bluish, kind of purple territory above the red. Does that mean we're trying to break free of some of that downward drag?
Yeah, that purple zone that you see there is what we call positive dealer gamma, and this comes from proprietary data that we actually source from the CBOE, and then we model it and we figure out how buy-side traders are positioned. So what you see in this case is dealers have positive gamma to hedge. Positive gamma means volatility suppression, and the market tends to find the biggest strikes from the board. So if you hover over that strike at the top left, that big blue bar, you'll see what we call a 99th percentile gamma strike. That's also just a zero DT strike. So that is a huge level for today. And as 60+% of SPX volumes are zero DTE, well, that is a big strike for a lot of volume, right? A lot of volume is tied kind of to that level. A lot of liquidity is tied to that level. And I would just say overall as well, that into tomorrow, traders are not expecting much volatility either, again, because of the fact that the catalyst is NVIDIA earnings on Wednesday night, right? So today and tomorrow, you would anticipate it being a fairly low vol session. And then obviously the fireworks tomorrow night. Now, all of this is in context to calls really losing a bid. We put this on X earlier, but if you go over to our scanner tool, you'll find that what has been happening lately is a rotation from that's a button right there. What's been happening is a rotation from actually just do this.
Should I filter this, rank it somehow?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit easier if you just go to the vol dashboard. So the second button down, we can just shortcut this thing. One more button down there.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Yep.
All right, so what you're seeing on your screen here is fixed strike vol for the S&P 500. So what is the vol doing at every single strike? Now, if you see there's a little bit of a darker shade of green there, right where your cursor is for the 28th and 29th, this is that elevated vol that is in place, right, due to NVIDIA earnings tomorrow night, right? Now, what's been happening under the surface here is that strikes to the upside. They've been losing implied vol. That vol has been coming down a little bit due to some call filling, but also what has been more interesting to me is we're starting to see a bid to puts. It's not a significant bid to puts, but skew is starting to shift back ahead of NVIDIA earnings, which I think is very interesting because you would have expected there had been to be more call demand when Powell said, hey, all right, everybody, I think we're going to get a rate cut, and rates are all leaning towards getting a cut, and the betting market.
Instead, it's what it's balancing out. It's kind of balancing more, or what?
I think people are starting to hedge, is what I see, and I think if NVIDIA misses, right, or even let's just say they just kind of come in line, and it's just kind of like a whatever report, right? We do risk, I think, sliding to the downside because I think NVIDIA is more holding things up right now as opposed to holding things back, if that makes sense.
Okay. Now, the potential then for, look, I'll say that I've kind of been in the camp that NVIDIA matters more to some extent. And I don't know, I'm a fundamentalist, I guess, at heart, where profits and the AI stuff is the more kind of true reason for how we got here. But that's certainly debatable. I know there's a lot of people that put a lot of, credence into the Fed story. That hasn't really been my necessary view. I feel like that's a little bit, it gets kind of political in some ways. I know it's important, obviously. But the fact that, look, here every day, top options volume, I mean, right after the indexes,
Yep.
I'm looking at it, is NVIDIA itself. And that hasn't changed. That hasn't budged. So, I mean, how can it not be such a huge
Yeah.
piece of this story, if not the number one?
I totally agree with you. And the other thing about this is slightly off the options topic, but I think it's interesting, right? When ChatGPT 5 came out, it was kind of a flop, and I think a lot of people now, if you just look at Twitter and what's happening on X, right? The narrative has shifted away from like AI as this accelerant to like ChatGPT being this symbol of like a short-term top. It's like the most, the latest algo or the latest iteration of the LLMs, right, didn't get us the incremental value that we were all looking for. And so I think people are now starting to say, hey, like, you got to show us something, like prove something here. And if NVIDIA is not putting up those numbers that show that CapEx and all this other stuff is still expanding, then you have not only NVIDIA giving some back, but then to your point, you got Tesla, Apple, all these other names that are related to that AI story kind of giving some back. And that's most of the market now, right? That is such a big part of the market. And so that losing that narrative is important. You also see that narrative being lost in Bitcoin as well, right? With MicroStrategy and issuing more shares, and very quickly these themes that were so prevalent in the bullish case and pushing the market forward, they're taking some shots right now, right? And so people need to start to believe in something, and NVIDIA can't help that, but I think it's up to them to kind of reinstill confidence in the story and the prevailing theme of the market.
Okay. I'm going to go to the chart here for a second, just because I want to get some more perspective on the potential for upside, and I guess to the same kind of tone to the general downside as well, because we talked about some of the areas where we want to sort of break free. This is a simplified chart. If we're able to get out of here, Brent, do you feel that we've got momentum for a push? I mean, we're not far from all-time highs here. This is so important, is that, I like to watch over the weekends. I'm like 100% crypto. That's all I watch. And then yesterday with Bitcoin coming off and Master coming off pretty hard, there was a possibility where we came in today and maybe you would see some of the high flyers drop. Maybe you would see a hood get hit. Maybe you would see some of the other ones, but we haven't really gotten that. Instead, it seems like the broad market is finding some form of leadership every day. So, the light is green on my risk radar for stocks. It seems like we're in pretty decent shape as far as the equity index goes.
Yeah, and the downside story is very simple. If we lose 6,400, then you get the onset of what's called negative gamma. So put values start to pick up, hedging flows push the market lower, and then you're also likely to see vol jump a lot if 6,400 gives way. So you often hear about Vanna flows, right? So negative Vanna, or the ability for VIX to spike, that creates downside hedging flows in the market that pushes the market down quite a bit. So 6,400 is risk off. And then to the upside, the first strike you got to look at is 6,505, which is the big JP Morgan collar strike into September. That's such a well-known strike at a big round number of basically 6,500. So I think what happens if NVIDIA is in line or beats, then you start to see the S&P just kind of grind along into mid-September. We've been calling this a zombie because it's likely to be a very low volatility regime, just something that grinds ahead. And then you see people step back out on the risk spectrum. So chasing some of the AI stocks, maybe getting back into crypto, leaning into small caps a little bit more, kind of chasing the stuff that has less volatility suppression, so to speak. And that could be kind of a final blow off top into September options expiration and FOMC.